Welcome to another episode of our series on direct instruction under our Teaching and Learning Institute from EduTransform. I am Kwadwo, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's series or today's session. In today's session, we want to look at building mastery through practice. Building mastery through practice. Over the past weeks, we've looked at several things that we believe is very important for us as educators to be focused on as we do direct instruction. And among the things we've looked at several things that we called, to us, is what we call the gold standard for quality instruction. But for us, we agree with John Hattie when we say that effective teaching occurs when the teacher decides on the learning intentions and the success criteria and makes them clear to students, demonstrates them by modeling, evaluates if they understand what they have been told by checking for understanding, and retelling them what they have told by tying it all together with the closure. And when we have all these things playing together, then we have what we call the gold standard for quality instruction. We then will have all the elements that we have talked of in our previous episode. For us, when students are aware of learning intentions and the success criteria, when the students have opportunities for guided practice and independent practice, students will own their own learning. And these are four cardinal elements in the direct instruction model, where you should have learning objectives, you should have success criteria that help the learners to identify the key elements which they need to have to tell for themselves that they are successful at what they have been asked to do, where there is a starter, where they have presentation, and we looked at engaging presentations in our last episode, where there is guided practice, where there are closures, and then where there are also independent practice. In episode 1, we looked at what we call the episodes, the direct instruction, a general overview of that. Then in episode 2, we looked at learning objectives and success criteria. In episode 3, we looked at the concept of starters and plenaries. We realized that it is one of the key moments where we get a chance to introduce what we intend for the learners to do, and then we get a chance to end it in such a way that the learners can tie things in. In episode 4, the last one that we did, we looked at presenting the lesson, how to teach the lesson effectively. We're going to look at our next episode, but we want to encourage every one of you to look for us at EduTransform GH. We are on all the social media handles. You can look us up on Facebook and then like our page, share the things we do there if you find them very interesting, so that other educators can also make use of them to ensure that they can have good practices wherever they are. Now, in today's session, we want to look at some 4 key things that are very vital to the lesson, that the concept we want to look at, which is practice. So today we are looking at 1, how do we gain deeper understanding of student practice and the various types of practice sessions. We are learning to find out what students should practice and the amount of practice time needed. What should they practice and how much time should be devoted to it. We want to learn the prerequisites for successful student practice, the conditions that students need to have to ensure that they have successful practice, and then also want to make an effective practice plan for students to ensure they benefit from the sessions that we do with them. If we don't have all these things done, we could be teaching, we could be doing several things, but it will not hit the bottom line. My name is Kwadwo, and as usual, I have my colleague on the other side, Kwesi. How are you?
Very well, Kwadwo.
It's been nice to always having you on the other side for us to do these discussions to help educators look at transforming the practice that they have there. Now, in a summary from the things we have done, what would you say is effective teaching?
With every effective instruction, the students should be given a lot more opportunity to respond to what they have been taught, and also to review what they have been taught. So if you look at the module that you shared earlier, students will have the opportunity through guided practice and independent practice to respond to what a teacher has just taught them.
Yeah.
And then through the starter and the plenary sessions, review. After they have been made clearly aware of what success look like and what exactly they are supposed to be learning in a learning objective. Barack Rosenshine, that we referred to his work in the last episode on presenting effective lessons, has clearly indicated that when you go to an effective teacher's class, one thing that you will see is that the teacher is always making sure that students don't just acquire knowledge, but the knowledge that they acquire is connected. Because we know that the brain does not really accept information that are not well processed or structured.
Yeah.
So you see that in effective teachers class, they ensure that students acquire knowledge that is connected. And then they give students opportunity to rehearse that knowledge, as we have said earlier on, through the guided practice and independent practice sessions within the lesson and even beyond it.
Yeah.
And that is why he talks about a lot of hands-on activities, always after, not before, but the basic material has been what? Learned or presented to students. So that is exactly what you will see in an effective class, which, based on John Hattie's findings and from our viewpoint, we believe that is a gold standard for quality instruction anywhere, where students are given opportunity to respond to the information or the knowledge that they have acquired, and that the knowledge is given in such a way that is structured, it is connected, students can see the linkages, the associations between concepts, and they build that over a period of time. That is the best way to keep things in a working memory, so that you can use them for more higher, deeper levels of learning, of transfer, and all of that. And that is what effective teachers aim at. For these sessions, we're actually speaking to the minds and the practices of the African educator, and challenging all of us to be our best wherever classroom we find ourselves, to really ensure that there's meaningful learning happening for every child that is in our care.
All right, thank you, Kwesi, for that wonderful background to what we're going to discuss today. We have a very nice opportunity now to look at the key thing that most of us will do to ensure that students now have effective opportunity to do learning for themselves. And that is what we call practice. So looking at that, what would you say is practice in terms of teaching and learning?
Right, so when you talk about practice, I mean, typically in education, we say assessment, right? It comes in the form of exercises, homework, class tests, and all kinds of things. But this practice work or assessment, if you check the Google search or the Microsoft Edge search for a meaning for the word practice, they refer to them as repeated exercises. So it's not something that you do for once. It's repeated exercises or repeated performance of an activity or a skill. And the purpose of it is for you to acquire and maintain proficiency in something. So even if you have been taught the parts of speech, right? Somebody just explaining to you that these are the different types of parts of speech. They focus on one of them, maybe a noun or a verb or adverbs or adjectives, and explain to you what they are, show you some of them. You can identify them in a text. You can use them in your writing. They can do all of that for you. Once the person has explained that to you, for you to really internalize that knowledge and for it to become part of your practice so that you have mastery on how to use a part of speech effectively in your communication, whether oral or written, then you should be given an opportunity to respond to what you have been taught through practice. And Practice is repeated exercise, okay? So a child will not understand and appreciate adjectives just with a single exercise or performance of an activity with reference to adjectives. They need to have opportunity to regularly and repeatedly perform that activity if they can acquire, improve, or maintain a level of mastery or conceptual understanding of the things that we teach in class. So exercises or practice or assessment, we are talking about repeated exercises, repeated performance to achieve proficiency or to improve proficiency in a particular skill, knowledge, performance, or understanding. Right, so from the definition as we've looked at, practice or exercises are repeated activity. They should be regularly be done in order for a student to acquire, improve, or maintain their level of proficiency. So if you look at how students practice in the class, there are certain key roles that a teacher plays in this, not just designing the practice tasks, but in administering the practice where the students are responding to it. There are two important roles that a teacher plays in this part of students' learning. The teacher either leads the practice work where the teacher will do it with the student, or the teacher will test the student where they give them a series of work or exercises or practice work. The students will do it on their own. But if you look at these two things that a teacher performs in ensuring that students have enough practice time in responding to the instruction that has been given, there are three phases of this whole practice. The leading part where the teacher is working with the student on to practice a series of exercises in order to consolidate their learning of what has been taught. The first phase is where the teacher do it with them. The teacher will supervise and direct students to engage in a series of practice work. So if you've taught students on how to multiply fractions or add two-digit numbers, once you do it, then you should have a series of similar tasks that you will do with the students together, and then you supervise them to do it. And then within the same guided practice, there's a component where you should pair the students to do a series of similar tasks after they have finished with a teacher-directed task. And the last part is the testing, where there is independent practice, and every student, sits in an exam-like nature, sitting arrangement in the class, and they themselves individually respond to similar tasks. Students are introduced to this phase of practice work when the teacher is satisfied that every learner has achieved at least 85% mastery of what has been taught through the practice work that is being done. From the teacher-directed practice work, where they do it together with the teacher, and then the peer-supported work, where they do it together as colleagues within the class, supporting each other's learning. When these two step phases have been achieved, and a teacher can see that 85% mastery is clearly evident by every student, then you give them work to do on their own, which is a testing phase, where students engage in independent practice. But there are a number of reasons why students actually engage in practice, or why it's important that as part of every instruction, we give students a number of opportunities to respond through practice to the instruction. Jenna Scott gives us about two of them. The first one is that we need to move what has been taught into memory. Whatever the teacher has taught the student, it has to be consolidated in their working memory. So the only way to move information to memory is not by teaching, it is by practice. And the second reason is that if we can move skills and processes towards proficiency, where the students now can easily do this without even thinking about it, for there to be fluency in that skill, in a given body of knowledge, for a student to say that I've mastered this, I know it, I understand it, we practice for that to happen. So this is very important because instruction cannot do that. Instruction alone cannot move students skills or understanding to the level where they just know it and it has become part of them, or this thing is in their memory, that any question you ask around it, they can speak about it, they can debate about it, they can think intelligently about it. It only will happen when students have engaged in enough practice, not enough instruction. That is why it's always important to teach less and give students more time to practice. And there's a lot of sense instructionally in a saying that says that practice makes man perfect. Is that? Yes. So there's perfection or maturity, right? Or students come to a level of mastery or understanding only when they engage in practice. And that is one key reason where we need to provide that opportunity during the lesson for students to engage in practice work.
All right, that's so good, Kwesi, for that. Now, where does practice occur in all this discussion that we're doing?
Okay, so based on what I just shared, whenever a student acquires a new skill through instruction, a new knowledge, develop conceptual understanding through the instruction that a teacher just gave to the student, whenever they acquire that, there is a need for practice. So like we've said, the reason for practice is to move the student's skill or knowledge or the information they've acquired to a point of fluency or to the point where it is consolidated in their working memory, right? So if you just keep teaching without practice, learning will not happen and student achievement will always be poor. So that is one key area where practice occurs. Anytime students acquire new knowledge. Also, practice occurs when students are reinforcing. You remember the definition from Google search or Microsoft Edge search, they talk about practice as repeated exercise.
Yeah.
Right. To acquire, improve, and maintain.
Yeah.
Your level of proficiency in something. Okay. So you don't only practice when you acquire new knowledge, you practice to reinforce, to improve, and maintain the existing knowledge that you have. And lastly, students practice to try to maintain a higher level of proficiency. That is the maintenance part of it, of an existing knowledge that they already or skill that they have. But if you look at our direct instructional module really considers practice. It is big on practice because without independent or guided practice, the conceptual understanding that we want students to have, the skills that we want them to develop, it won't happen. Direct instructional module, or what we say is a golden standard for quality instruction, hinges on the opportunity we give students to practice. And in this module, educators use the direct instructional module to really help students to develop that understanding. And this is where it happens. After there is a presentation, students are given opportunity to engage in guided practice work and also through independent practice. But this is a traditional classroom, but I always want a flipped classroom environment where teachers can convert the traditional way of presenting information and knowledge through technology, creating instructional videos, and then the actual lesson time, students have opportunity to really engage in a lot of guided and independent practice time to really consolidate their learning.
What can we practice then?
So there are a number of things that students can actually practice. And it has to do with the things that they are learning. And when we talk about learning, we are referring to the things they need to know.
Okay.
Right? Facts that they need to know, facts that they need to memorize, information that they have to memorize. They need to practice all of that in order to be very fluent at defining concepts, explaining them. They need to practice understanding, things they should be able to evaluate, synthesize, analyze, problem solving, processes, steps, systems, in the body like biology, digestive system, all those things, they need practice, all of that. Not only, when we talk about practice, it's not only mathematics, even map reading, reading the globe, having we're calling mathematical fact, right? The way to perform experiments, all the things that we teach them, student needs to practice that. And that has to do with two kinds of information that we give students, which is a declarative knowledge, the things they need to know, the what and the why of the facts. And then there's procedural knowledge, the hows, how to write a narrative essay, how to write argumentative essay, how to write a newspaper report, an article. All of these things have to be practiced within the classroom. So these two kinds of knowledge should really help teachers to really understand the things that they need to expose students to in order to engage in a lot of practice with them so that they can consolidate their learning and have a deeper conceptual understanding of things in order to be able to transfer what they know to create things like in a procedural knowledge aspect where they get to create essays, create sculptures, portraits, artwork, and a lot of works that they do in ICT, in arts, and the various subject areas that students are exposed to.
It's interesting you talk about the fact that it is not only mathematics that we practice. I remember back in my school days, we were told by some teachers and sometimes by some of our mates that as for English, we don't learn it. There's no need to practice it. If your father doesn't know how to speak English, forget it, you won't get it. But from what you're sharing, everything else can be practiced. Everything. And it doesn't have to be a particular subject area where you practice. So we were made to believe it is only mathematics where you practice. And so when you're going to write an easy English exams, what is the basis of any practice? Just go and write. It was already in your body. It's interesting you say that we can
because
practice.
You know, Kwadwo, the language teacher will teach you the features of an article.
Yeah.
Right, and then he gives you an assignment to write one. But writing the introduction of an article is a whole new set of skills.
Yeah, and a skill that I struggled with all the time.
And so if students have enough opportunity to even learn how to write the introductions, right, before they move into developing them into paragraphs, the main body of the article into paragraphs with main ideas, with supporting details. If they are doing this over a period of time, that is, practice should be repeated performances, right? Not just a one-shot performance. And that is what we do in our classes that really prepares a number of students for failure, but not for success. So our instruction does not really result in a high rate of student success because of the way we treat student practice work.
That's for the clarification. So when can we practice and how much practice is really necessary?
All right, so if we look at some of the research on this, basically we've been referencing the visible learning. It says that students need about 3 or 4 exposure to learning, right, over a period of time before they can even, you can say that they have learned it, right? So it is not one of kind of approach will not work. Right. And the effectiveness, according to the research, of the length of that practice depends on the length of spacing between practice 1 and practice 2. So let's use a simple example we've been using. If you're teaching students to add fraction, and you've taught them, you've given them exercises to do, and that is it. They never come back to that exercise again until there's a test. That's the problem. Right? That's a problem in itself. So there has to be spacing. So they need to do the exercise today, but they should have opportunity to do that particular exercise of adding fractions over a period of time until they reach that level of proficiency or fluency in that particular task. So that is very important. And it depends on the level of challenge or complexity of the task. If the task is very simple, then a brief period between practice 1 and practice 2 will help students to consolidate their understanding. But if it is complex, it is possible, it's better you give students enough time. When they've tried it now, you give them enough time to try it again and keep trying it until that particular concept is now home to them, and that they know, they now come to the point of saying that, aha, this is what this is about, right? So we don't have a lot of aha moments in our classes. I think basically we kind of rush or cram or mass the practice sessions, which is critical for learning, part of the instruction. And I think that that's what we're speaking to encourage educators in Africa and all African classrooms to make sure that we provide our kids with enough practice time so that they can consolidate their learning and be successful with it wherever they find themselves. So the summary of it is that we need to practice until this is crystallized in the minds of students.
Okay.
Right. If whatever you are teaching is not crystallized in the minds of your learners, then they can't stop practicing it. Right. So that is the whole idea. So anything that you've taught, you need to approach it and think about it in that light. That I will let them do this work over and over again. If it could be the same work, if they are not getting it, or different set of work that relates to the same concept over and over again until that has been clearly been mastered or reached level of proficiency by every learner.
Okay. And are there kinds of practice then?
Yes, there are different kinds of practice, but let me add this. The reason that we need to give students a lot of times to practice, right, is that when you give students work, this is what goes through based on the research of James Nottingham about the learning pit. The student says, I think I know this answer. I know the answer for this question. When he looks at the question again, then he begins to realize that this is not as easy as I thought, right? I am confused, right? I need to work hard at this. So students go through this thought process, which is called a learning pit, right? So they come to the point where they are confused about what exactly is required of them, how they should solve the question, how they should write the essay. I mean, they tried and they don't know what to do until we scaffold it for them, right? Through maybe collaborative work. We talked about the teacher guiding them to start working on some of it so that they become familiar with it. They work with their peer to work on a similar task so that they get used to it before you actually give them the opportunity to do it. In that case, you give them that bridge to cross from where I think I can answer to the point that says that I understand it now. So you avoid the learning pit. Other than that, if you just teach and you give the task to them like that, you are going to have students come to the point. And there are a number of kids, unfortunately, in the African classroom, in the Ghanaian classroom, that are confused. They are at the bottom of the pit and they don't know how, they don't have any ladder of support to really come out of that particular struggle. And they keep struggling and the concepts are being continually built because every day there's a new lesson.
Yeah.
That keeps going on, new exercises. The child never understands, have not fully grasped the earlier concepts, and we keep building upon it. So many kids are confused and they are not doing well in the assessments that we give them. And we think that they are not serious, they are unwilling to learn, they have a poor attitude towards learning. But basically, it is because the educators in the room have not fully grasped the practice, the essence of using student practice work to consolidate learning and to help students develop proficiency and mastery over the things that they are teaching them. So you have a number of kids who have a lot of knowledge and skill and understanding gaps that is not enable them to succeed. So it's important, as James Nottingham said, that it's important that we provide students with challenge and less instruction. And you give them challenge through guided and independent practice work, where they receive assistance through the guided practice an independent practice where they now, after they have mastered it, they now do more complex tasks. So if we do it that way, then we will lead a number of students to greater level of success. We will not have situations like this, where a number of kids, and in fact, this one is asking for help, but most of our children are not asking for help because they feel their self-esteem have been affected by the way the class is organized, where only the strong and the able students' voice seems to be heard and mattered and responded to. So if we move prematurely in our guided practice sessions, we are inevitably going to have a number of students end up spending so much work in remedial work, trying to undo misconceptions and misunderstanding and the gaps in their skills or knowledge. So the saying, haste make waste, is something that every educator needs to fully appreciate and respond to. That your instructions should be embedded with tons of opportunity for students to respond to through guided practice. So there are a number of ways that we can design practice work for students so that we can help them consolidate their learning and do well in our respective classes. In fact, there are 4 kinds of practice work. So I'll start with the first one, which is deliberate practice. And that has to do with when you have taught a particular skill or idea or concept, give students enough opportunity to practice it. Okay, so for instance, if you have taught them how to identify the main idea in a text, you should have a series of worksheets or practice work. So this is an example of about 4 different practice work, and students will do it, and you'll be able to see, oh, practice 1. Maybe he scored 5 out of 10, or somebody scored 2 out of 10. And then he's given the same, checking the same skills, another practice 2 work, and you might see that the guy who got 2 is now maybe moving to 3 or 4. We'll do it again in a different set of questions, similarly testing the same skill level, until you are satisfied that every child in the class is actually demonstrating 50% proficiency, 85% proficiency in that particular skill or knowledge that he has been exposed to through instruction, right? So that is what the guided practice is. But the research points to the fact that if the deliberate practices, if the deliberate practice is spaced, like you saw practice 1, practice 2, space in terms of the students are allowed to perform it over a lengthy period. Okay. Then what you are going to see is that you are going to see better outcomes, right? If you space the practice time over a period for students to do it, then they will have better consolidation of what has been taught. And that is what the research points to, that if it happens over enough time period, then students succeed in their learning. But one key aspect of practice work is that it should always be mechanical or just checking fluency. But when students have consolidated their learning, it is important that we give them tasks that are dynamic. And that means that it gives them the opportunity to engage in transfer and deep learning. So a typical examples of this could be that an art teacher, instead of asking students to produce artwork, the students can become evaluators of artworks that have been produced by students and provide descriptive feedbacks to their colleagues using the guided or the clear success criteria in evaluating the works. Again, with determining the main idea, a teacher can use both digital and print materials for students to practice the skill of determining the main idea for a given text. Well, a science teacher can also use a hands-on experiment experimental practice works for students to practice all the steps and applying them, the steps involved in the scientific inquiry process. So these are things that teachers can do, vary the nature of or the context of the exercise and force students to really apply the knowledge that they have. But even deliberate practice and space practice is important. It is also key that when we teach students, we teach them a number of things throughout a week or throughout a month or a term. It is important that we give them interleaving practice work where they practice multiple skills, not only on a test paper. Okay, they should be able to practice multiple skills or topics at the same time. Right. So if you have taught them how to, what do you call it, add. Sorry. If you have taught them how to add fractions and multiply fractions and divide fractions, then you should be able to have a practice work that has all these three exercise skill sets being tested, right? And it should not happen only in a test, like a typical exams question, but as part of the everyday rehearsal learning exercises that are given, we should have interleaving practice work. But what we normally is common practice is a blocking. So if I have finished topics on fractions, I give them work and then we shelve it. We move to another topic. I give them work, we shelve it. Until end of term exams or exams on the unit. That is where all the things the students have learned are now going to be tested. Blocking does not really help students to develop deeper levels of knowledge and transfer learning skills. So these four practices are so very relevant, okay, in making sure that we are giving students enough opportunity to practice what they just learned over a period through spacing, and that they are practicing what they are learning in a different context, and that a number of things that they have learned, they are given opportunity through interleaving practice to really test their skills and their deeper and develop deeper understanding and knowledge of it. So that is how these four kinds of practice can be effectively used by educators to make sure that students have had enough opportunities to respond or interact with a particular knowledge or skills that the teacher has exposed them to through instruction.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. I know there is a lot to be said about supporting the students through the pit so that they don't fall into the pit, but they are supported so that they can go over that pit. And such of the practices you mentioned here is very, very important because like you said, most of us were at the stage where we get so confused and some students give up. Not that they cannot do anything, but because there's no mechanisms in place to help them overcome that. And that the various examples you've given in terms of the way we can do practice are all going to help us and help the students overcome that. But then let's look at the condition.
But the typical mechanism in our context, our part of the world, is the extra classes and the remedial works. You understand?
Yeah. Why should we wait for the damage to be caused?
Yes, it's become business for many educators. So people are really not putting enough effort in making sure that the child actually gets it and the child actually learns during the lesson time and succeed with that. So I think that is something that the ethical aspect of our job as educators, we need to look at that. That when a child is failing, we should equally feel responsible for that and make sure that we're using the right pedagogical approaches in making sure that every child is not left behind by succeeding. And it's possible for children to succeed if instruction is carefully
For me, the sad part of it is the fact that we even label them and we blame them for not being able to succeed. They are confused, they are in the pit, but we tend to be the ones that I've done my part, I've taught you. Yours is to do the work that I've given you to show you've understood it. But It's not easy to just understand. I will need help to be able to do that. And so that's something we need all to look at. Can we then look at the conditions that we need to have for effective practice? What conditions should there be for effective practice then?
Basically, I can think about three of this. The climate in the classroom should be conducive for learning, right? Somebody have said that students need to muscle before they can bloom. And I mean, as educators, we know about the Bloom's taxonomy. They need to remember, understand, comprehend, apply, evaluate, synthesize, and all of that, the higher levels of learning. But we also know about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, where people need to feel belong, they need to feel loved, cared for. So if we create a classroom environment where it is conducive for learning, where students feel belong, where students feel that they can make a mistake and not be laughed at, that they can make a mistake and learn from, right? That is very important for practice to happen, so that nobody is afraid to make mistakes in that space, because they know that making mistakes is equally important for learning. Right, so as educators, we need to be mindful of the kind of learning environment we're creating for meaningful learning to happen through effective student practice work. Students need to feel confident, they need to feel motivated, they need positive energy, positive emotions to be able to do that. And that means that the second thing is that there have to be personal or emotional connection between what is being learned. We should be able to situate what we are teaching students or asking students to practice with their own personal or individual experiences, right? And that is very key. That connection with what students already know and have experienced is very important for learning to happen. If we are developing curriculum, that the curriculum should start from where the learner is, or where the learner community is, or his communal experience is. Once the child can make those connections, it will be easier for them to learn the contents that we so much believe that is essential for them to know and understand and be able to do. So these are very important that as educators, we are mindful of it, that we create a classroom environment where everybody feels belong, a family of learners, where you celebrate their individuality and their progress and their mistakes, right, are opportunity for them to learn from. I love a video that I saw in a kindergarten class, and all that the teacher, he has a mantra that says that in kindergarten, all we do is to try and try. So in that video, there was a child who the work was difficult for her to start to do. And all the teacher did was to just remind her and the entire class that what do we do in this space? We try, try, try. That's all. And that was a huge motivation for that child who was reluctant to start because she found the work a bit more difficult or challenging for her to just make an effort. Just make an effort, that's all. And at times, some students want to hear the adult in the room to say that. Make an effort, right? Just try. I don't care if you don't get it right, just try. So that you can be, as the adult or the practitioner in the class, you can actually have an idea of the misconception, mislearning, and the mistakes that children make, so that you can guide them to that level of proficiency that they need to attain as far as their learning is concerned. So that environment and the personal connection that a learner needs with what is being learned or taught is very important for meaningful practice to happen in the classroom. And one third key thing is that all the things we ask students to practice, whether writing an essay, whether formatting a text using the PC, whether creating a PowerPoint using the PC, whatever we teach them in art, in ICT, in literacy, in numeracy, in geography, in our world and our people, in all the subjects, even Ghanaian language that the students take in our schools. Whatever work you give them, if they don't have the knowledge and the skill base, there is no way they will be able to do it. And that is why a number of our homeworks return to us undone, because the students have skill, knowledge, and understanding gap. The learning did not happen for them. And for that matter, they are not in position to be able to execute the tasks that have been assigned to them. So we need to be mindful of these three things. The environment should be conducive for learning. Making a mistake should not be a source of punishment. It should be a motivation to try and try again. And students need connections with what they are learning, with their own individual experiences, and the world at large. Relevance is very important. And thirdly, they need the skill or the knowledge, understanding base to be able to do the practice work of essays and all the various assessment or practices that we give students to engage in. So these are very critical three things as prerequisites for effective or meaningful student practice work to happen in your classroom.
You can see from the way I'm nodding and smiling that there's a lot within these prerequisites that we cannot digest here. Because I remember my own experiences of teachers that just by the sheer comments they will make you quail and not be willing to try.
Yeah.
And the ridicule you will get in the class for making a mistake, which actually will be fueled by comments of the teacher, sets that environment, that toxic environment where you are not willing to make a mistake. I remember one of my friends, she was so good, but she would never say anything in class. She would rather write it down on the table and say, you say it. Because she doesn't want to say it and make a mistake. And it means that the classroom environment has not been designed to support the practice that needs to be done. And like you talked about the third one, I even want to look at the knowledge and skill base necessary for practice. There are times that you are giving some work, even the way to hold the compass to do the construction, you've not mastered it. And they ask you to go and do geometric construction and inscribe this circle and do a complex task given you to go and do it all by yourself at home. And you dare not bring it back undone because you had problems. You cannot say, I did not understand it. And even when you do it and you make a mistake, you are in big trouble. So this is one key area that I wish that in the very near future, we will spend some time to look at it, because we sometimes does not allow the conditions to be present for our learners. But
it's built on the idea that the fact that I've taught you means that you should be able to practice it.
That is it.
That's
I have finished my part, and the rest is yours. Go and get it done.
Exactly. But when you consider why we practice, it tells you that instruction does not lead to consolidation of learning and understanding. It is through practice. And we have been saying even in our schools that practice makes man perfect. So if maturation or maturity comes through perfection, through practice, perfection comes through practice, then it's important that we see that learning happens through practice, not just through instructions, right? And for many kids, they need that practice time. They need to try over a period of spacing, deliberate, dynamic practice or interleaving practice work to really come to a point of mastery of what is being taught. And at times it can be just a single thing that a student is still struggling with. And we keep piling it up and it becomes very difficult. And that is why they don't do it. So they end up having a very negative attitude towards learning and towards schooling as well. And that accounts for the, unfortunately, most of the poor performances that we see around us.
I am very passionate about this session. Probably we'll come back and then delve deeper.
We'll look at it, the prerequisite,
Yeah.
So this is a general overview of what we think is necessary for that effective student practice to happen.
Okay. All right. So in a nutshell, what have we been talking about? Can you give us a summary of what we talked about in terms of practice, that key element that we need to ensure that students' learning is cemented, is consolidated for them.
Good. So we've been using this whole idea that from Barack Rosenshine's research, it says that, I mean, if he checked the number of teachers' work, and he realized that for most of the teachers who are effective, this is what they do. They don't just ensure that students have acquired the knowledge through instruction, but they also ensure that whatever knowledge students have acquired is connected. They're able to connect concepts. They're able to connect different ideas. And that they are given opportunity to rehearse what they know, understand, and can do through a series of hands-on activities, which are, we've called the student practice work, or repeated exercises that students actually engage in. And they will never give this to the students until they have instructed them that the basic material has been learned. When the students have really learned the basic material, that is when the guided practice comes in. So if you look at our gold standard for instruction, we say that if you make what students are supposed to learn clear to them, and how success look like with their learning, and you give them enough opportunity through guided practice and independent practice to really respond to the instruction, then learning will happen and student achievement will improve. And that is a module here, that when the teacher has instructed students, he needs to lead them to do a series of practice work to consolidate their learning. He needs to pair them up through collaborative learning to practice the same skill over and over again until the basic materials that have been taught has been fully learned or mastered. And when students have mastered this, you can only move to where students are doing tasks on their own, which is the testing phase, when you can assure yourself that for every child in the class, he or she has achieved 85% mastery of the basic material that has been presented to them through the guided practice phase, where the teacher leads through directed teacher practice work, as well as the peer support learning or practice opportunity that are given to them. When that has been achieved and every student can show 85% proficiency, then you can ask them to do homeworks like that, or you can ask them to do class tests or a unit test or an exams, which are the independent practice work that students actually engage in. But whichever practice work you give students, it's important that they engage in deliberate practice. That is, whatever thing you teach them, whatever skill, knowledge, understanding you give them, student needs to practice that thing over and over again. That is deliberate, over a period, that is space. And you also have to give them opportunity to use that knowledge in a very unfamiliar context. And that is a dynamic dynamic practice. And overall, everything that you've been teaching over a period, it is important that students have some exercises that have all those, that is testing all those objectives over a period of time. And that is interleaving practice. If you have these 4 forms of practice exercises available for your learners to engage in, then you are likely to achieve a higher rate of success with a number of the kids that come through your classroom year after year.
All right. I think it's been so helpful. My takeaway from this session on practice is the fact that at the moment where we finish our instruction, we leave the student at a point where there is a challenge pit for the students, where they can be confused and they need our help. And we can get them to overcome the challenges that they have if we scaffold the kind of activities that we want them to do. If we give them the opportunity to have deliberate practice which is spaced, and I like the fact that we need to also make sure that they see the work or the practice work in novel ways where they can apply it in dynamic situations. And then we should interleave it so that you don't block or do the test and block, because it is one critical challenge that our learners tend to face. They learn fractions, they put it away, and then they only come back to fractions at the end of the term when they are doing exams. Certainly such students are going to struggle. They won't do well. But if we are going to be purposeful in our practice that we give to our students, we're going to help them to succeed. I want to encourage everyone to join us as we continue our discussion on effective teaching and learning, the direct instruction model as we are doing it. We want you to look out for EduTransform GH on all social media platforms. Share our videos when you find them, and invite your friends to join us next week, Saturday, as we meet to continue doing these discussions. And we hope that you take them on board and use them also in your schools and your practice, such that your learners will be the end beneficiaries of your practice. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Kwesi. Hope to see you next week, Saturday.